Hello and welcome to the Auditing Antics podcast. So we are a little late today if you're watching this live, but we made it. We're here. Just had some things to deal with before and it ran over. So happy to be here. And as Michelle was saying before we went live, today's going to be a bit of an opinion piece from us.
Yes.
So we wanted to talk about what happens when you're in these real life situations when you have difficult decisions that have to be made and you are coding, auditing, whatever it is that you're doing and you come across this mess and you have to navigate personally what you think should happen essentially, but then it's that broader scenario of having to bring it to maybe a compliance officer or an administrative board. And depending on the makeup of the organization, if it's small, you could have issues with, maybe the physician owner is the main person you're going to and they
Mhm.
don't want to hear it. Or if it's a larger organization, it could be a situation where there's almost too many people involved in the process. And in that situation, one person over another may have a say whether or not that leads down the path of compliance. So I know that I hear this from my members, and Michelle, you and I have dealt with this quite a bit over the years. And we thought we would just break this down and talk about what we can realistically do to think through it and make sure we're protecting ourselves while still, upholding compliance in the practice that you're working
Mhm.
with.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. It can be a very difficult and intimidating thing to go through. But there's definitely a line in the sand, and you have to personally come to the decision where does that line lie, and what are you personally willing to take on from a risk factor, because we aren't exempt from the risk of what we do. And simply saying, well, this is how I was told I had to do it, unfortunately, is not something that, you know, going to cover your behind if
Mhm.
things really do actually go south and there is a true issue. So there's kind of this rule you need to make for yourself about how far you're willing to go, and then you have to prepare yourself to fight against that essentially when you feel that line has been crossed.
Well, and let's talk some about that initial finding because some people don't truly understand what it means to find an issue. And what I mean by that, it takes me back to days when I was doing more management and, someone brings an issue forward and then you ask for examples and they have one. And it's like, okay, well, that's not really a hill to go die on if you have one example and that's the only time that that occurred. That's an educational situation and we move forward from there. So we
Hmm.
have to make sure that we truly understand the depth of what's happening as far as, for example, let's say that we have a finding that a particular service that was rendered in the office was not being performed correctly or documented correctly. So at that point, maybe you're a coder and you're starting to see these come through. You're an auditor and you're looking at a particular department or specialty and you're seeing it with all of the providers. Okay, at that point, we have some concern. So, next steps is really diving in and doing your own research. And
Hmm.
Michelle, I know that this has been a pain point for both of us over the years where, we have developed those skills, but a lot of people want to just come to you and be like, "Oh, I found a problem. Here it is." And they don't have a resource. They don't really truly know why it's a problem. They don't even know official sources they can go to look up that information. So, in that situation, how have you handled that in the past, Michelle? Just making sure for yourself and others if you are, overseeing them in a lead type position.
So I always encourage people to work on that skill of research, because that's what it is. It's not just something that I think we inherently know. Some people, maybe their brain just works better in that way, but you need to be practicing research. Um, I am guilty of what I'm going to say next, and Steph knows I am guilty of this. But your first response to something you're questioning shouldn't be, "Oh, let me ask Mary, who sits next to me. Mary, tell me the
Mhm.
answer." Now, I will say when I ask Stephanie my questions, usually I know the answer, but for some reason in my mind, I don't think I know the answer. I do think
Yeah.
my however, you need to take the time to say, "Okay, I'm questioning this." I'm not saying you need to go out there and memorize the 2021 E&M guidelines, for example, or the 2023 revisions. Know the resource, know how to use it. Same
Yeah.
thing with ICD-10 guidelines. Know the resource, know how to use it. Practice using it. Same thing with like your payers. Understand how their policies sections work. A lot of the payers have extensive policies similar to how CMS does. Understand how to find those policies and how to best research those things. Um, if you know how to use those resources, then you will be able to find your own answers, and then you will have a source as to of why you made the decision you made. Unfortunately, not everything we get in those sources is black and white. So that's another part of the education of this is knowing how to interpret that, and people fall in various, levels of strictness when it comes to these gray areas. So learn how to interpret those. What are they really saying? Pay attention to other things. Like I know Stephanie, they just did an overall haul of the E&M booklet, the MLN E&M
Mhm.
booklet. And in there, they had this section referring to like those eye injections and an E&M on the same day. That's an instance where they're giving like shockingly clear guidance. But some people will see that and say that only applies to these eye injections. But when really
Mhm.
it doesn't.
Yeah.
This is them telling you what they expect. And so know that you might see it in a different way or under a different thing, but when they're giving that direction, they're not just giving it for that one scenario. They're going to expect that to be applied across the board. So that was just like a good example of sometimes it requires several different resources to be able to interpret, a coding guideline or how a payer wants something submitted. So that's how I've really handled that in the past, is encouraging the use of your resources and that not being a standalone person, because everybody does interpret things differently, and not everybody keeps up on the changes
Right.
that are
Mhm.
coming along. So if Mary's been in her position for the last 30 years, when's the last time Mary looked at that policy to know that that's current and that is correct? So if you can do the research and you just get in the habit of doing your own research and learning to interpret things, and it's a process. Sometimes we get it wrong. Hey, I've interpreted something and had somebody come back and say, "You know what? Looking at it again, listening to what you've had to say, this is where I interpreted it differently. I understand where you're coming from." And it's a process that you can grow and build through. So just knowing how to use your resources, not memorizing them, but knowing how to use them.
Yeah. And when you have the finding, you have your source, and then you're ready to bring it forward. What you're referring to there is really that third step, because you've got to come together with whoever it is that is in a management level position, administrative position, to really think through and make those decisions and show
Mhm.
different angles. Now, I've been asked recently, how do you go about mitigating that risk? Because as a consultant, for example, or as someone doing external audits, there's going to be findings, and a lot of times people aren't going to want to hear it, right? The
Right.
finding is going to be something at times that can completely change workflow. It can change the structure of the way an EMR system is being used, and it's not always a smooth transition to fix that. So,
Mm-mm.
the way that I gauge that for myself, and I probably have some more comfort level with this just based on the defense work I do versus the preventative work that I do. But when I have an adverse finding, I think about it from that defense perspective. So even if you don't do, legal type defense, what you can think of is you can say to yourself, okay, if I had to appeal this in a claim, and it was my job to write an appeal letter, how would I support this based on the documentation in front of me? And essentially, the way that I gauge it is we either have, yes, this is good, it'll pass easily on an external audit. Then we have, oh, this isn't the best thing, but yeah, we could argue it. It is showing the work, but let's improve it going forward. And then there's the third area of, no, this is missing a lot of the main requirements. This would fail an audit on the first pass, and we cannot let this go through and just sweep it under a rug. So
Mhm.
I kind of use those three areas to make it so that I don't overcomplicate what I'm working through, and so that I have that comfort level myself as I go into, different meetings with other people to talk through it. And, it's one of those things, again, going back to when I'm asked about, how I mitigate this, or why, as a consultant, for example, I would stand so firm on something. It really
Mhm.
goes by those three things. So if I'm there and I'm helping out with audits or education or building a product or helping someone start a new service, if what they're doing is going to result in that third scenario of no doubt about it, automatic denial on an external review, I can't move forward.
Mhm.
And there have been some situations years and years ago where, when I was working under Sean, for example, at Doctors Management, where I would have an issue and be like, look it, I'm really not comfortable. This physician is not listening to me. He owns the practice. He doesn't want to make changes. His attorney's already involved, and we essentially had to bring it to the attorney. It was under ACP, so they had that privilege, but bring it to the attorney and kind of wash your hands of it. Like, there's not really a way to move forward with this person when that is
Mhm.
their approach to what they're going to do.
Yeah.
And I have been challenged quite a bit, but going back to those sources, that's always what I stand firm on. And to be clear, when we talk about official sources, this does not mean that we pull up articles. Even for
Mm-mm.
myself, you can go onto my website. I write a lot of articles, but that is me writing something based on another source. So I don't expect people to take my written word and use that in defense of whatever. It
Mhm.
is essentially an opinion, like we said in the beginning of this episode. So, coming forward with an AAPC article, for example, it is awesome to give insight into what's happening in the industry, maybe different viewpoints on a situation. I think there's absolutely a place for that, and that is how I use it, including something like a forum, for example. We've
Mhm.
talked about that for years. You cannot make a decision based on someone's opinion in a forum, but that's actually where I start my research if I don't fully grasp what's
Yeah.
happening or if I don't understand someone else's viewpoint. I start in forums, I start in those opinion articles and start to kind of dissect, okay, what are different ways we could look at this, then go back to the true source and say, okay, CMS, payers, whatever it may be. CMS itself has so many levels between, getting into HHS and CDC and the OIG and all of the
Mhm.
different internet manuals. So, sometimes you have to take that path to figure it out, but don't be afraid to be challenged either. And,
Mm-mm.
in a situation I had currently, I was challenged, but it was something I knew that, okay, it was a pretty big deal where I'm going to have to consider, how do I even move forward in this project if they're not even going to listen and consider what's being said.
Yeah, and I think that's something that you kind of have to prepare yourself for when you start down this path. And I just want to say it's okay to not have or not be able to give them a direct answer. But what you don't want to do is try to make something up. So if they ask you a question and you have to go back and look, that's what you say. It's okay. It can be really nerve-wracking to take something like this to a superior and say, I don't agree with this, this is why. And then more questions get asked, and maybe it's something that you had some tunnel vision on, or somebody's outside perspective has brought up other questions, and you say, okay, let me go look at that. Say, I didn't come across that, but give me some time and I will look further into that,
Hmm.
so that I can clarify. And it's totally okay to not have the answer on the spot. Just know that you're going to have to go back and do some more research, because I
Hmm.
know for myself, sometimes when I get nervous about something, I quickly lose my train my train of thought, and then it's like,
Well, even for myself,
not really making that face, but in my head that's what my face looks like.
or if you're on a phone call only. For
Yep.
me, yes, I do consider myself an expert after the years and the experience that I have. But what you're saying is exactly what I do as well. It's something, I deal with a lot of situations, but I don't deal with all of those situations every single day. Some of them are a year ago or 2 years ago, and I don't hesitate to give what my thought is in a meeting or my opinion, but I do follow it up by saying, I've got to go back and look at that. And I had a situation like that come up last week in a meeting, and there were two different sides to the situation. It was a compliance meeting, and talking through the sides, talking through what we thought was in the guidance, in the CMS guidance. But at the end of the day, we've got to go back and check. And I said in that meeting, hey, to be honest, I haven't dealt with this in about 2 years. This is how I remember it, this is how I think it's interpreted, but let me go back and read it to confirm. And
Mhm.
that's extremely important, because you don't want to go down a path where you're giving bad information and sticking by it just because it's something you said, you
Yeah,
know?
and it's okay to also go back and read that and be like, "Oh, maybe I was wrong."
Hmm. Yeah,
I mean, we don't learn without failure, in my opinion, and I I absolutely hate doing things wrong, and no matter what anybody says, 100% am going to take it personal when I do something wrong. But one thing that I have learned in this is, with the very wide interpretation of guidelines and policies. Just know, maybe you're not wrong. Maybe you're just interpreting it different. And this is where flexibility comes into play. You can't be unwilling to be flexible. Like you said, there's a few different criteria that you put things up against. And that's something that I've been working on and trying to evolve, because I like to be a very yes or no. It's either yes or no, but all of it's gray. Like, there rarely is
yeah.
a yes or no. And sometimes Stephanie will be like, well, and she has something really reasonable to say, and I'm like, darn it, couldn't you have just said I was right? And I go back and try to figure out for my thought process how I can do that differently and learn from that situation. But it's an evolving process, and what it comes down to is you have to have your boundary of where it's no longer okay to be flexible, and just know that you may be standing alone on that hill.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is it a hill worth dying on? Yes or no? And
Sometimes, yes.
sometimes yes it is, and there are times when I personally have, been working on a project, and somebody has come and said, this is what the client says is acceptable. And I've had to say, absolutely not. And I presented my sources as to of why it was absolutely not acceptable and why I would not be personally auditing to that standard. And I am very fortunate that I work with people who listen and they value discussion and they value conversation, and they also put value in the work that I do and know that if I'm coming and saying this is outside my scope of reason here, I'm not willing to just say because the client wants this, this is how it should be done. Because the clients are having external audits for a reason. Like that's one thing that really like, oh, I could get on a soapbox right now. But for
Mhm.
some reason, people employ you to do an external audit and then are like, we have all of these policies. You need to audit to these policies because we can't mark people wrong if we've been telling them to do it this way. And it's like, not it's not just an audit of your people's work. You also need to take a look at the broader picture. What are your policies? And if they're having findings based on policies that you say are okay, maybe you need to go back and look at your policies.
Yeah, and that's really important, and that's a point where yes, you and I are external, but a lot of people are internal and they're dealing with something like that.
Mhm.
You know, there's a situation, we know a certain organization has a policy that essentially, and I know this is going to sound crazy, or I hope everybody thinks this sounds crazy, but essentially this policy allows for the providers to fully 100% copy their note and bring it forward, put in a macro statement which looks the same every time because the wording is the same every time, and only change a date. But because they have a policy that says if the provider reviews it and they agree with what they said last time, remember everything, you know, the subjective portion, the complete context of the HPI is exactly the same. Like we're talking about 100% copied
Yeah.
note and brought forward. Actually, let's say 99.9% because they will update the date. And that's it. But that particular organization does not want an adverse finding. And what I think
No.
about too, even though I'm external, think about those people internally that are having to code and push out claims with that type of thing happening. And, you know, it's like they want those organizations want sheeple, right? They just want
Yep.
you to follow along, push the button, push enter. But we know, having, you know, a background in compliance, and you know, people in this industry are very detail oriented. We want to know the why. There's not
Mhm.
many people that you will meet in this industry that don't want to dig in and don't care about their work, and you know, are not very highly efficient and, you know, smart people. So it's one of those things where it makes me think, are they just sick of fighting against it all the
Yeah.
time and
Or
pushing it through?
do they think they can't? Because one thing that I was looking at a book, and I think you did a book club on this, but that set
Oh,
boundaries, find peace. And one kind of takeaway that was just like to me was that people use guilt as a tool to get you to conform.
mhm.
And I'm like, yeah, they do. Like, I think of my upbringing and how everything was surrounded about like guilt. And then like when you're at work, they try to like use all of these things to make you feel like you're the problem. And when you can kind of separate yourself from that and be like, I'm my own person. I have
Mhm.
my own mind. You can say what you want to me, but I've done all of this work to show why I think the way I think or think that what this is doing is wrong. But you have to you have to overcome that and be able to stand up, and then you have to be able to do what's right for yourself. Like for me personally, I've had to leave employers in the past because no matter what I did, the more I researched, the more I presented with correct information, with sources, the more it was picked apart, the more ridiculous things they started to attack me with. And that's when it's like, okay, these people aren't interested in, they just want a yes man, or like you said, sheeple. And you have to really start evaluating how you fit into that environment. I can tell you it stole a lot of my peace, and it stole a lot of my peace even after I left. I shouldn't,
Mhm.
it's easy to say like I shouldn't have allowed that, but how much of your stress
Mhm.
comes from that external pressure, or like you feeling like you don't have a say on your team, or that you don't have a trusted supervisor that you can bring these things to say I disagree, and can trust that there's going to be a conversation. um
Mhm.
you know, I was told one time, well, why can't you trust my years of experience? And it's like, well, why can't you provide me with anything?
A
i'm
source, yeah.
I'm so glad you've done this for so long, but why can't you provide me with a source? If you have so many years of experience, why can't you provide me with a source? And so it's a process that it's very personal for
Mhm.
yourself. And I know we hear from people all the time who are having these struggles, and it's sometimes, we're doing audits, and we're auditing coders, or we can see that a coder has worked this claim, and I'm going through it and I'm like, holy cow, what is going on here? Why would a coder submit this like this?
Mhm.
And then I have to think to myself, what have they learned and how have they learned it? Who is
Mhm.
teaching them? And a lot of times it's not about, I know from my experience in production coding, it wasn't necessarily about quality. The people who had quantity were praised.
Mhm. Yeah.
And it wasn't about, heck, they weren't even checking quality to my knowledge. That's the scary part, but it was the quantity that was praised. It wasn't the quality, and that was really frustrating for those of us who were trying to focus on quality and quantity, but you can't have both, in all honesty. And it it can just be so frustrating. So you kind of have to, it's an evolving thing, I think. It never starts out that way, and to prevent yourself from becoming like bitter and somebody who's viewed as somebody who drags everybody down in the workplace because you're always complaining, it's really important that you get those skills in place, and then as you get those skills, you have more confidence in yourself and you know your worth. And that will show through your work, and you just have to be prepared if you're in that environment for people not to appreciate that
Yeah.
and
Well,
know it's
and
not you.
it really is, it makes me think about how I really view the industry of coding, auditing, billing. I view it as a career, meaning this isn't just a job we show up to, clock in and push claims out, right?
Mhm.
And that goes back to what I was saying about a lot of the personalities of those of us in this industry. And, with that, think about it. You don't want to keep all of your eggs in one basket, meaning if you are only looking to your employer to invest in you, then you're going to they're going to fall short. Because if you look at even like how they give education stipends or conference stipends, things like that, a lot of times it's only going to be going to like a manager, a supervisor, a director. And then if they do, in my situation years ago, if they give education, like a budget is what I mean, towards webinars or things to individual people, that was pick and choose. There was really no rhyme or reason there. So you need to think about this, longer term as well. And I know people can feel really trapped, especially when you're starting out in the industry, because you've got to make it, at least 2, 3 years somewhere to get a good base for
Mhm.
yourself. But you really do have to look around and start thinking about it. And even if you're in a situation like that, to Michelle's point and what she did, still do the work, still pull the sources, still put your foot down. It's one of those things where what are they going to do? Are they going to tell you that they don't want to hear the source? And, a lot of times what plays into that in the background is the fact that the people that are educators and leaders in these departments have probably been letting things go for one reason or another. Maybe, they haven't worked with a particular specialty from an education standpoint in 3 years, and now they realize 3 years later that a particular procedure was documented wrong. And now we've got
Mhm.
a really big self-report issue. And, it kind of goes into as well. I think about all of these situations I've dealt with, but there's so many times that I'll meet with a practitioner one-on-one and we'll be talking and they're like, well, why was I never told that before?
Mhm.
And I'm
Mhm.
coming in as an educator, and this has happened to me when I'm internal, so it's my peer who wasn't doing it properly, or I've had it externally where, I go through an entire audit process, and then during the education session, I'm thinking it's going really well. The providers are really involved, they're hands-on, they're asking questions. We had great conversations. I had my sources even on the slides for what I was saying. And come to find out later, I created an entire, thing of chaos for the group because somebody inside that organization was telling them opposite just to get
Mhm.
claims paid. So, there's a lot of ways this can happen, whether you're internal or external, but you need to work on yourself first.
Mhm.
And, like you were saying, Michelle, that's been a big focus in my membership this year. We do a quarterly professional book club, but I tend to get a lot out of it personally as well.
Yeah.
And I have focused a lot this year on boundaries and standing up for yourself because you've got to be listening to your voice. You can't listen to all of these other things that are happening. You can come to a table and have a conversation, but you have to be your own person. So
Yes.
you've got to be firm in what it is that you're working through and, your comfort level, and seek it out if you don't have it. There's so many people. Obviously, I have a membership. A large part of that is
Mhm.
the question and answers. A lot of people like to come in and bounce things off of me, or if they're really struggling and someone's fighting against them. I even had a situation recently where the person is external to the organization and they had administration and an attorney telling them otherwise, but the information that was being given was something that would 100% need to be defended. And the attorney's looking at it from the legal side, which, in my experience, is what we go down to when we've got to argue points. And, legal has their stance, compliance has their stance,
Not
and
really
it's
the place
messy.
you want to get to.
Right.
Um,
It's messy.
so that's something that's a point that I want to make is, yes, it may be defendable, but remember there's a cost to defense. So yes, this attorney may be saying I could defend this in the court of law. The whole purpose is to not get to the court of law. Like
Hmm.
that is the whole purpose of compliance, and our job is to try to prevent you from getting to that court of law.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and in addition to that, it's our job to let the other people know, okay, this is my concern. And like I was saying, those three different areas I try to gauge things up against. Obviously, if I think it passes, that's a moot point, right?
Mhm.
But if there's a chance it could be an external finding, So we've got that 50-50 chance or 100% chance where I'm like, heck no, we're not moving forward, or I'm not moving forward, depending on how this turns out. With that 50-50, talk it out. You've got to
Mhm.
come to the table. And I'm not saying that nobody should ever question and there should never be back and forth or discussion, because 100% there should be. And actually, that's where I've learned a lot myself as well, is the back and forth that I have with other administrators, with
Mhm.
especially physicians, when they're like,
Yes.
okay, well, why are you looking at it this way? This is what we're thinking when we're doing this. And, that's important. So it's okay to have the conflict. It doesn't
Mhm.
mean it has to be toxic. There
Nope.
can be conflict, there can be disagreements, but you need to come to the table and think through it. And sometimes that's the piece that's missing. And I've had that situation even recently where someone very high up was immediately very dismissive of everything I was saying in large groups of people. So it was something I was not willing to bend on at all. It was a big deal. The person didn't want to listen. So, you know what? You look to other people that are in that organization to have the conversations, and it worked out.
Mhm.
So, you know, I know it's probably hard for people that are listening, especially if you're new. But if
Mhm.
this is something you've been doing for a while and you haven't had that confidence, hopefully hearing our experience, what we're trying to do, will really help. Definitely seek out any kind of material you can related to the boundaries. Boundaries are
Yes.
huge. Personal and professional boundaries are massive, and that's been kind of that, main spot that I've been able to go back to, that helps ground me and helps show me, okay, this is what I need to do to, insulate and protect yourself. Everything
Yeah.
doesn't have to be a yes, and you don't have to go along with the flow. If you don't understand or you don't agree, there should be conversations.
Mhm. And just know boundary setting is a painful process. It is not something where you're going to go and you're going to say, you know, I have this boundary on my time. So some people work in an hourly where they're paid hourly. It's a little bit easier to set boundaries on your time in those situations, but then there are people who are salaried individuals. And sometimes you do have to put some pretty firm boundaries on those things. So it's not going to be as easy as saying, I have I have this boundary of I'm not, this doesn't work for me.
Mhm,
You have to be able to say this doesn't work for me because, and
mhm,
have your reason and have something to back it up. You have to learn how to handle the guilt, the pushback, dare I say manipulation. There are there those are all things that you're going to encounter if you're somebody who's trying to make a change in an area where nobody has thought change was needed. So these are things that you're going to have to learn how to deal with personally. And I think these apply both in your personal life and in your professional life. So by working on these things and learning about these things, um, this is not something that is only going to benefit you in your professional life. It's something that's also going to benefit you in your personal life. It's going to help you bring peace to your life because
mhm.
a lot of times when we're stressed about something, when we're having anxiety, there's an external cause to that, unless you're me, and then I make up scenarios in my own head and cause my own stress, which that's totally different. It's totally different situation for which I have sought my own help for set boundaries with myself. um, but these are things that you need to look into, and you have to protect your own peace. And you know, sorry if your name is Mary, but Mary's not worth it. You know what I mean? I'm not meaning that because there's any particular Mary in my life, but they're
Yeah.
not worth it. You know
Well,
what I mean?
and just to round this out, I know that this particular episode wasn't about mental health necessarily, but I want to touch on that because this is huge. And this is something that I feel like people currently in the workforce, since I started younger when it totally wasn't a thing until now, where people are becoming much more aware and standing up for themselves, you know, it's the most important thing that you have that you can grab onto to help you through these situations. And we've talked before and joked, Michelle, about getting help and getting medicated. Yes, I laugh about it, but I needed medication and it's made a huge difference in both my personal and professional life. And it's something where life is going to ebb and flow, right? So
Mhm.
whether we're dealing with a work issue or a home issue, they're going to be happening most of the time simultaneously,
Mhm.
and we've got to figure a way to balance this and not come into work and take it out on people there if you don't agree. Like, you still have to remain very professional.
Mhm.
You've got to follow things like we were talking about today, but
Yeah.
that's all going to be a part of the balance and the way that you're able to conduct yourself and handle yourself. And Michelle and I, we take things very personally, as she's been saying. We internalize things a lot. There's a lot of times where there were situations happening that I was causing the high anxiety on myself.
Mhm.
I was the one taking it a step further. The client thought everything was fine and moving smooth, but I thought, oh, well, I mentioned end of this week and now it's Monday and I didn't, like, why? Why? Just
Yeah.
communicate. And
Yeah.
I've worked through that with boundaries, clear communication, meaning that deadlines are set. You're touching base. It's not just ghosting somebody and,
No.
being passive aggressive if there's a problem, because that's going to make it even worse and it just continues the toxicity. And,
Yeah.
we could talk about that in itself, but my point is, make sure you're taking care of yourself, because yes, this is a part of mitigating our risk in our industry. But when you think down to it, the reason people don't stand up for themselves are these personal issues or whatever may be happening,
Mhm.
whether someone's attacking you or whatever.
Yeah.
So think about that. Look up some of those books. I'll try to put some of them out there. I can put it in the comments for the episode. Some of the books that we've read as a group in the past this year. They've been really helpful.
Yeah. Mel
All right.
Robbins is definitely a big one.
Yes.
She's a lot of what she says resonates with me, and I'm like, it can't be that easy.
Yeah.
And it's really not. It's not easy to implement that and rewire your brain. I think Stephanie can definitely attest to how I have worked and how I have changed my thought process and my outlook, and not internalizing so many things and being able to separate differing opinions from me just automatically being wrong. And so I think it's also helpful if you have somebody who can mentor you through this. And I think Stephanie and I, we kind of, I mean, we are sisters, so there might be a bit of a codependency there. I don't know, but I think we provide that for each other. Like,
Mhm.
I know I can go to Stephanie and say, this is the situation, and she's just going to be honest with me. And she knows that
Mhm.
she can come to me and say something, and I'll be willing to tell her if I disagree with her,
Yeah.
or like, maybe it could have been done a little bit different. And whether that's personal or professional, I think that's something that if you're new to the coding industry or looking to make a change, or you're changing to a new position or something like that, seek that trusted person out. It doesn't have to be within your company. It can be just somebody within the industry, and it can be found in many different ways. But be willing to invest in yourself in that manner.
Mhm. Yep. All right, so we will end it there. I hope that our opinions today really help some people. I know this is a common issue, so I hope
Hmm.
that this has helped people really think about where they're at, think about what they could do maybe to move forward, and really consider what's needed for yourself personally, and then go from there. All right, well, thank you for joining, and we will see you back next week.